Learning how to properly test your meta ads is one of the most important skills that you can develop if you plan to spend a lot of money advertising on Meta. In today's video, I'm going to give you a complete guide to some of the most popular testing strategies that exist. I'm going to break down all the pros and cons of each strategy so that you can decide what works best for your situation. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Michael and I help businesses scale their meta ads, and I also coach intermediate to advanced meta advertisers. I've personally tested pretty much every strategy that exists, and in today's video, I'm gonna distill all that information so that you can test your ads more effectively. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so first off, what should we be focused on testing anyways? Is it all the various settings inside the ad set? Is it the creative? Is it the links? Like, what should we focus on? Well, I can tell you, having done this a very long time, that nowadays the product, the offer, the creative, and the angle account for around 70 to 80% of your results. So if I were you, I would focus on what makes the most dramatic impact on the results. So again, that's going to be the product, offer, creative, and angle. Now, if you already have a solid foundation of profitable campaigns, then you can focus on the other 20 or 30%, which is going to be your audience settings, your campaign structure, your bidding strategy. So back 4 or 5 years ago, we used to really focus heavily on the technical side of meta ads, on audience hacking and setting up various really technical structures. But nowadays, the algorithm has changed so much that it's really rewarding simplicity, and it's taking a lot of those options away from us as advertisers. So it's much more effective to focus on those core levers that impact your results. So product, offer, creative, and angle. All right, before we jump into these specific campaign setups, we need to discuss some core fundamental testing principles that apply to all the different strategies, okay? So I have another video here that you may want to check out before you continue any further, but I'm gonna actually summarize them here for you now. So let's get into that. So the first core testing principle is to only change one variable at a time. Okay, so if you're testing audiences across various ad sets, then it's crucial that you keep all the creatives, the copy, the links, the headlines, everything inside those ad sets identical. So the only variable that's changing is the audience. That way you can be 100% sure that it's an apples to apples comparison, and you can see the impact on how changing the audiences actually has. If you're testing various creatives across multiple ad sets, then it's crucial that you keep the audience settings exactly the same. If you do that, then you can be 100% sure on the impact of the creatives. Now, the issue arises when you start changing multiple variables across ad sets at one time. If you do that, you won't be 100% sure of what caused the test to fail or succeed, right? If it does really well and you change the audience, the link, and the text, like, was it the audience, the link, or the text that made it work, you know? So it's super important to move in a very scientific, methodical way, be really strategic, and only change one variable at a time, and you're gonna be much more confident and learn a lot more from each test that you run. The second core testing principle is that you should group similar creative formats together in an ad set. So for those of you that don't know, Meta's algorithm doesn't treat all creative formats the same. I've found that it tends to favor certain creative formats over others, and it will push spend towards specific creative formats over others. So the order that Meta prioritizes spend is going to be number 1, dynamic catalogs, then reels, then carousels, then static images. Okay, so if you were to put all those different creative formats in one ad set, that it's going to spend in that order. So your static image may not even get a chance to be tested. It may not get any spend at all. So it doesn't always spend exactly like that, but in a lot of cases it does. So it's really important that if you group similar creative formats together, like videos with videos, static images with static images, it's a much cleaner test. You don't have to worry about Meta favoring one style over another. It's going to be like a true apples to apples comparison, and you'll get a much cleaner view of whether or not one creative outperforms against another. So in general, just try to keep, catalogs alone in one place, in one ad set or one campaign. Keep videos separate in one ad set or campaign, and then static images in their own campaign as well. Once you've established like various winners, I don't mind mixing various creative types into like say a scaling campaign. And actually Meta recommends it. But when you're testing, I think it's best to really separate them out. That way you can test them more effectively. All right, the next core testing principle is to make sure that you're setting appropriate budgets for your tests. Okay, so what do I mean? My rule of thumb is to set my budgets in such a way that I can reasonably expect to get 1 to 2 purchases per day per ad set. And how do we determine whether or not we can get 1 or 2 sales per day? Well, we're gonna base that off of our average cost per purchase. Okay, so let me give you a really simple example. So let's say you have an average cost per purchase of 50, okay? So let's say you wanted to do a testing campaign with 3 ad sets. Well, in that case, I would do no less than $150 a day at the campaign level if you're doing a CBO. Or if you're doing an ABO, I would say do $50 a day per ad set at a minimum. If you set budgets that are way too small, Meta is actually going to have a hard time getting those conversions, and it may go several days without getting those conversions that it needs to optimize. I found that Meta does best when it has like a constant stream of conversion events, kind of guiding it to the next person and the next person and the next person. So it's really crucial that you don't basically try to be cheap and save money and do these tiny little budgets, because it's gonna end up costing you in the long run and you're gonna have way worse performance. And even if you do get something that works at a small budget, it doesn't mean it's gonna work at a bigger budget. So do yourself a favor and spend an appropriate budget for your average cost per purchase, and you're gonna see much better results. So the fourth core testing principle is to give your tests enough time to learn from them, okay? So the worst thing that you can do is decide you're gonna test something, see some bad results within the first few hours or even the first day, you panic and then you turn it off. So for me, that is a total lose-lose scenario, because you didn't give it enough time to potentially work, and you didn't learn whether or not that thing would work anyways, right? So it's like you lost money and you didn't learn. So that's a big problem. Now, what I'm recommending that you do instead is that you be disciplined and you tell yourself, okay, I'm gonna test this thing, I'm gonna stand by my test, and I'm gonna give it enough time to be sure of its outcome, positive or negative, right? So let's say you launch a campaign, you're gonna give it at least like 3 to 5 days to see if it's gonna work or not. Once you're sure, and that the exact time really depends on your budgets and your average cost per purchase and stuff like that, but once you're sure, then you can turn it off, if it's not working, right? And for me, it's like you either win or you learn. So if you do a test and it works, great, you won. If you do a test and it fails, well, did you really lose? Like, you learned that thing is not gonna work, so now you know not to do it the next time. So you kind of won also. So again, just be disciplined, try not to panic within the first few hours or first few days of the campaign's life. Give it enough time for Meta to do its thing. I usually launch something and I give it at least 3 days before I assess the results or do any optimization. I would say, like, if you're more experienced and you're working with much bigger budgets, then you can make these decisions sooner, especially if you have like a really keen sense on like what the metrics look like for a good campaign. And then if you're less experienced or you're working with smaller budgets, I would give it more time. Ultimately, there's no like perfect amount of time. You're gonna probably let things run too long sometimes, you're gonna probably close things too early other times, but ultimately it's your job to kind of find that sweet spot for your ad account and learn when is the right time to close something. Last little point about that, most of my best campaigns, they start off good and then they just get better over time. It's not that common that I have something that starts off terrible and does really good. So, but it does happen here and there. So it's important to at least give it that like initial period, maybe 3 days, 4 days, something like that, just to be sure. Yeah, that's principle number 4. Principle number 5. So just because an ad or an ad set doesn't get spend does not mean that it's a bad ad or a bad ad set. Okay, so I've seen a lot of people online saying that, hey, if it doesn't get spent, that means it's not good. Meta's algorithm knows best. It's just nonsense, guys. Meta's algorithm is not always correct, all right? And that's why jobs like mine exist. It's for us to step in when the algorithm is not doing the right thing. So, and I know this for a fact because I've had so many instances where I have run ads where it's like, let's say it's a campaign with 10 ads, right? And 3 of them get all the spend and the remaining 7 basically get no spend at all. Well, does that mean that the remaining 7 ads were bad ads? Not at all. So what I typically do is I will duplicate that whole campaign with all 10 ads. I'll take out the 3 ads that took all the spend in the first campaign and just test the remaining 7. And what I've found is a lot of the times I can find another winner or another few winners within that 7. So if you follow the line of thinking that if it doesn't get spent, it's bad, you're gonna end up making a ton of creatives that you don't even truly test, right? You can't know unless you put money behind it, okay? So if it doesn't get spent, doesn't mean it's bad. Try to isolate it and make it get spent and see how it does in terms of results. Okay, the last principle and probably the most important one, if something is working, leave it alone. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to edit, modify something, and I end up breaking. I can't tell you how many times I've learned this lesson where I have something that's working really well and I try to scale it or edit it, make it better, something like that. And I have to say like 8 or 9 times out of 10, you end up just breaking it, okay? So this is especially true if you're working in a newer ad account or an ad account with not a lot of conversion data. You end up breaking your campaigns instead of making them better. So especially for those of you that are newer or have like ad accounts that are a little bit untrained or more precarious, definitely if something is working, just leave it alone, guys. Work in a new campaign or in a completely new ad set if it's an ABO, and you're gonna have a much better time. It's better for you to leave it alone and let it make you money and train your ad account than try to touch it, try to scale it, and potentially break it. So trust me, that's like a veteran pro tip. I've ruined a lot of campaigns so that you don't have to. All right, you guys. So we have to first understand the fundamental difference between campaign budget, or CBOs as a lot of people call it, and ad set budgets, or ABOs. So CBOs versus ABOs. So there's a huge difference and you need to understand it. So check this out. So when you have campaign budget selected, that means that you're going to be giving the budget at the campaign level, right? And Meta's algorithm is going to decide how much each one of these ad sets is going to get per day. Okay, so let's say we have $100 at the campaign level. Well, these 3 ad sets are actually going to be competing for spend every single day. And the most crucial thing to understand about a CBO or a campaign budget is that whatever you do to one of these ad sets, let's say if you turn off one of these ad sets, it actually impacts the others. They can be very fragile, and so you have to move very carefully and understand that anything that you do in one can affect the others. For example, if I were to say run this like $100 a day, 3 ad sets, each one would get roughly $33 a day, right? Well, if I were to turn off one of them, it's gonna liberate that budget that it was spending, say, yesterday, to the remaining 2 ad sets. And if that amount is large, let's say that was the top spending ad set, well, the other 2 now are gonna absorb that budget, and that could potentially, you can treat it like they got scaled or they scaled up, and that could ruin their optimization. It could push them out of the hot pocket that they were in and basically ruin the whole campaign. So it's very crucial for you to understand that these things are always competing for spend, and there's definitely pros and cons to that, right? The pros are going to be that Meta's algorithm is usually quite good at skewing the spend towards the ad sets that are going to perform best, right? But Meta's algorithm is not always correct, right? And so sometimes you have to step in and optimize these things, meaning you have to turn off any ad sets that's getting a lot of spend that aren't giving you good results. So that's super crucial to understand. But CBO campaigns, like overall, this technology works really well. It didn't work that great at first when they introduced CBOs, but nowadays I use CBOs quite a lot personally. So the main benefit of allowing Meta's algorithm to skew the spend towards the ad sets is that you're going to end up saving money by not overspending on losers, right? Loser ad sets, loser ads, stuff like that. So it can be a really effective and cost-effective strategy to use CBOs. Okay, there are some cons though. So when you're running a CBO campaign, it's best practice to not introduce new ad sets into the CBO because, like we discussed, the CBO is kind of a living organism, if you will, right? Each one of the ad sets actually impacts one another. So imagine we had this setup here, right? $100 at the campaign level, 3 ad sets, each one is getting more or less $33 a day. We know it doesn't spend exactly 30, evenly, but roughly on average, right? Now, what if you were to introduce another ad set into here? Well, now instead of dividing $100 by 3, you're now dividing $100 by 4. So that can throw off the optimization of the existing ad sets. The new ad set is unlikely to get a lot of spend because the other ad sets are already kind of optimized in a certain way. And just generally, you could break it, basically. So if it was working and you introduce something new, you can break it. So that's one thing about CBOs that's kind of annoying, that once you set it up and you create it, the only thing that you really should do is potentially scale it up, vertically, or you can scale it down, or you can you can close ad sets, right? So you can close ad sets. I don't really recommend that you optimize at the ad level if you have multiple ad sets. Why is that? Well, since we know that all the ad sets impact one another and the way that they spend, right? If you say turn off an ad in one of these ad sets, let's imagine that they each had 2 ads, for example. Like this, with this setup, right? You have one campaign, 3 ad sets, and each ad set has 2 ads. Imagine you turned off one of these ads and it completely changes the way that this specific ad set spends money, right, per day. Maybe it was the top spender and it just suddenly stopped spending, or vice versa, right? Well, that's going to impact the other ad sets. And that can have a cascading domino effect and actually ruin the whole campaign. So it's important that you watch how these things are spending, you don't introduce new things into the CBOs, and that you optimize at the ad set level. That's really going to keep it more simple. Look at the average results, and you're not going to be having this domino effect where you turn off an ad, which ruined the ad set, which ruined the other ad sets, right? So I know it's a little bit technical, maybe a little confusing, but I'm going to show you some more examples as we go along, and I think you'll understand it. So now let's move on to ad set budget optimization. So where am I? Here. Okay, so ad set budget optimization. So what's the difference? So when you choose ad set budget, that's also referred to as an ABO. So in that case, you're going to be giving each one of these ad sets a budget, right? So instead of doing, say, $100 at the campaign level and letting Meta decide how it spends among the ad sets, you would actually say, okay, I want this one to spend 33, I want this one to spend 33, and I want this one to spend 33. Right, for a total of 100, for example, right? And so there are some pros and some cons to this. I would say the pros is the ad sets don't impact one another. So like if you turn off one of them, it's not gonna liberate that budget, the campaign budget, to the remaining ad sets. So you don't have to really worry about like potentially breaking the whole campaign if you turn off an ad set or optimize at the ad level. So that's another pro. You can optimize at the ad level. So if you see some ads that are maybe not working, taking a lot of spend, you can turn those off without worrying about that domino effect, that cascading effect that we just talked about. Now, it can be a really scientific way to test as well. I know that ABOs is like one of the most common testing strategies out there and that are used at scale. So it's definitely tried and true. It works. So I definitely recommend that you try it out. And you can really do perfect apples to apples comparisons, right? You can do like angle 1 for an ad set, right? 3 to 5 ads, and do $100, and then angle 2, 3 to 5 ads, another $100, and compare them perfectly in line. There's no skewing of the budget or anything like that. And in that case, you know, it can be really scientific. You'll learn which one works best. But at the same time, here's the con. The con is that you may end up overspending on losers, right? You will actually have to manually turn off ad sets that are underperforming. So you have to keep a close eye on the ABO setups and make sure that you're not overspending on losers, right? So I like to think of CBOs as like driving a car on automatic, and then ABOs as driving a car on stick shift or manual, right? So with automatic, it kind of shifts the gears for you. It skews the spend toward the ad sets that are working best, but maybe it's not as efficient or as powerful as when you're driving a manual car. For example, like you actually have to be the one that shifts the gears. You have to turn off the ad sets that aren't doing well in order to preserve your efficiency. So that's the way I think about it, and I hope that was a helpful kind of explanation on the difference between CBO and ABO. If I had to summarize it in like a very short, concise way, I would say CBOs, all the ad sets impact each other. They compete for spend. They are a campaign type that you don't want to introduce new things into, like ads or ad sets. Really, all you want to do is increase the budget, lower the budget, turn off ad sets. So you don't want to optimize at the ad level. Ad set budget or ABO, it's going to be the ad sets don't impact one another. It can be a very scientific way of testing, but you may end up overspending on losers. So you have to be more present and manually turn things off. And you can optimize at the ad level. So that's the main difference. Yeah. So let's move on to some actual campaign testing structures now. All right, so now that you understand the difference between a CBO and an ABO, we're gonna look into some specific testing structures now. Okay, so this is the first one. This is a single ad set CBO campaign. This is a super basic setup. I would say it is ideal for beginners, smaller spenders. You know, if you're spending between like $100 and $500 a day, I would say this is an ideal setup, or less. You know, if you're spending $50 or $25 a day, this would also work. But the reason this is good for these types of people is that it keeps you in a nice consolidated structure. It's not going to spread your budget out too thin. It's easy to manage, right? If you have 3 to 5 ads, like you're going to be able to. You're not going to have so many ads to analyze and so many metrics. Like it's pretty, simple. When it comes to optimization, you can optimize at the ad level because there's only one ad set. You're not at risk of ruining any other ad sets. And basically, the way that I use these kinds of campaigns is I will set it up, 3 to 5 ads, $100 a day, $500 a day, something like that. If it works and it's profitable, I keep it. If it doesn't, I may optimize it at the ad level. I may lower the spend to signal to Meta I'm not happy with the results if it's not working, or I'll close it. That's it, right? So you either keep it where it is, right? It's profitable. You just let it train your ad account. You can also scale it up. If it's working, you can vertically scale it. Obviously, that's a risk, but you could do that. You can optimize at the ad level. You can lower the budget, or you can close it, right? That's really all I do with this setup. I will never add a new ad set into this. I will never add new ads into this, right? And we've discussed why. Basically, it would throw off, like let's say this first ad set was working and it was giving me good ROAS or low CPA, whatever my metric is. Well, if I go ahead and introduce another ad set into here with this CBO setup, right? Well, if I was spending $100 a day and this ad set was getting all 100, well, now I've introduced another factor, right? I've introduced another ad set that may start to take the spend away from the first one and completely throw it off its optimization. Maybe it can't achieve the cost per purchase that it was before. It's only getting $50 or it's only getting $25 where before it was getting $100, and it can't achieve the, let's say, average of $50 cost per result, something like that, right? So it's really important that you don't add new things into CBOs, basically. But yeah, like that's I would say the pros of this The pros of this setup is it's simple, it's consolidated, and it's pretty easy to manage, okay? The cons, right, is you can't add new ad sets into it. Well, you can, but it's not recommended. You really shouldn't add new ads into it. If it works, the best thing to do really is just kind of leave it alone. You can scale it up, but sometimes that could be a risk. Yeah, overall, it's like a really basic setup. I think this can be a little bit fragile at times as well. It's not the most robust setup, but again, I've scaled ad accounts to pretty big numbers just using simple CBOs like this. If you have something that works, great, you do another one. Test 3 to 5 more ads. And then you have a nice portfolio of campaigns. Now, you don't want to take this too far if you're only at smaller spends, right? If you're at smaller spends, I recommend a more consolidated structure, but like not too many campaigns, not spreading your budget too thin, stuff like that. But if you have the budget to spend, I think it's perfectly reasonable to have several campaigns going in your ad accounts. So that is the first setup. Again, that's going to be that one single Ad Set CBO. Next, we'll move on to the second setup. All right, so now we'll move on to the second testing setup that I think is perfectly valid and it works quite well. So this would be a multi-ad set CBO. Okay, so you can see here we have a CBO campaign. We're giving the budget at the campaign level. And we have multiple ad sets, right? And then different ads, like 3 to 5 ads inside of each ad set. Now, what's the purpose of testing multiple ad sets at once? Well, the way that I typically use this is I will test multiple angles inside of these ad sets. So maybe I'll do angle 1, ad set 2, angle 2, right? And ad set 3, angle 3. Right, so maybe these, in angle 1, all the ads are related to angle 1, angle 2, and so on and so forth, right? So that's one way. The audience settings inside of here would be identical. We would not change that. So if we were doing broad or interest, whatever, we would keep that consistent and then only change the ads, right? Or the alternative is instead of testing angles, you can maybe test audiences, right? Audience 1, audience 2, and audience 3. And in this case, if I were to do this, the ads inside of each ad set would be identical. And the only variable that we're changing is the audience settings, okay? So that would be a true apples to apples comparison. Now, what's the benefit of doing multiple ad sets? Well, if you have a bigger budget, you can test multiple things at once, right? You can test multiple angles. Again, these ad sets are going to be competing for spend. It's a CBO. So you can quickly see which ad set is getting the most spend, which one is potentially giving you the better results and stuff like that using Meta's algorithm. This setup, I would say, is better for people that are spending a little bit more, right? They have the budget to spend significantly more than their average cost per purchase. For example, if my average cost per purchase was $50, and I had this multi-ad set CBO, and I had 3 ad sets, I would do no less than $150 per day at the campaign level, right? Because that's giving each ad set the chance to at least get 1 sale per day. And that's what's really required for it to optimize well. So yeah, you can see that. You can see that here. It would be a 150 at the top, and then these 3 would compete for spend. Now, yeah, there's some pros and cons to this as well. Obviously, the pros is that you're testing multiple things at once. You are leveraging Meta's CBO like algorithm, right? So it's going to skew spend automatically to the one it thinks can give you the best results. Sometimes it's right, so you're going to end up saving money, so you don't spend money on the loser campaigns. And yeah, it's overall pretty manageable. If you're more experienced and you have experience optimizing CBO campaigns, it can work really well. Now, what are the cons? The cons of this setup, obviously, all the ad sets impact one another. So if you turn off one, you have to be conscious of how much budget that's liberating to the remaining ad sets. And You shouldn't optimize at the ad level because, again, that can have that cascading effect, that domino effect on all your ad sets and ruin the whole thing. So it's kind of a fragile setup in a way. You have to just be careful that Meta's not spending too much on the wrong thing. And if you optimize, you have to basically just be careful with your optimizations and make sure that you're not, you're accounting for how much is being liberated to the other ad sets. Again, I would never introduce new ad sets into here. I would never introduce new ads into here. So if this were to work, I would keep it, potentially scale it up where it is vertically, increasing the budget, or I would optimize it at the ad set level, so to avoid that domino effect. And then I would, if it wasn't working, I would potentially lower the budget to signal to Meta I'm not happy with it, or simply close it, right? So this is another great way. It's very similar to the first setup. It's just with multiple ad sets. So that is the second setup. All right, now let's get into the third setup. So the third setup is an ABO testing campaign, right? So this one I would say is the most common that I see out in the world. I audit a lot of accounts. I use this setup quite often, and it's quite effective. So it's used a lot for good reason. So how does this work? So this one is a ABO, an ad set budget optimization campaign. So in this case, the campaign is almost just like a folder, right? It's just holding all your ad sets. And then below it, you have your different ad sets, right? And you would treat these like their own tests. So each one, you would give it an ad set budget, again, following that rule of thumb of making sure it can get at least 1 to 2 purchase conversions per day, or lead conversions if you're doing lead gen. So you would set it up like that. And the pros of this is, like, you can test something, right? You can optimize at the ad level without worrying that you're gonna impact any of the other ad sets. You can turn off ad sets without, affecting the distribution of the budget, right? It's a very simple way to test. It can be a very scientific way to test, right? Because you can spend exactly the same amount on each ad set. Now the cons is that you could potentially overspend on loser campaigns that are giving you poor results, right? So that is the con. But the way that we typically use these is we will test right in here, new ad set every time you want to test something. And again, we can introduce new things into an ABO because we know that it doesn't impact the other ad sets, right? So that's not an issue. You can add new ad sets into this. I wouldn't add new ads into an existing ad set, but I would add a whole new ad set into this campaign, right? And when something works, again, you just keep it there. You scale it where it is, you keep it. You can optimize it down on the ad level, or you can lower the budget on it, or you can turn it off, right? So as you continue to test, this campaign is going to grow. Obviously, you're going to keep adding new ad sets. And ultimately, if you find something that's really crushing it, you can then graduate it. This is what a lot of people call it. Graduate it to a new campaign, into a scaling campaign. Okay, there's a lot of people make a lot of mistakes doing this, right? But just make sure that you're graduating it into a brand new campaign that's separate from something that's already working. That way you don't break what's working. Remember that golden rule. So overall, very good way to test. Highly recommend it. Again, you want to do apples to apples comparisons, like follow all those testing principles. But as you keep testing, you just keep adding new ad sets in here. Boom. Right? Maybe one of them is, and again, you'd want to do that one variable rule. Just be very scientific with it, okay? So that is the third. All right, so the fourth setup is getting an honorable mention, even though they are taking it away as a feature. That's Advantage Shopping campaigns. Maybe they'll bring it back, we'll see. But Advantage Shopping campaigns are a great way to test if you still have it in your ad accounts. So you can see here, they've already renamed it Advantage Plus Sales, so I think this ad account's gonna take it away. But this is what it used to look like if you're looking at this in the future, and it doesn't exist anymore. There used to be a campaign called Advantage Shopping Campaigns, and you see the ad set level and the campaign level are actually merged. So all you can do is add ads in here, Well, I used to use this. I've actually scaled ad accounts up to like 15 grand a day just using Advantage Shopping campaigns. They are a great feature. They're very robust. They are pretty flexible. You can add new things into there. You can turn things off. Like it was a great feature. I do not know why Meta decided to completely change the way they were doing something that was working. But anyways, what I would do in here, if you still have it, you can basically just do like 3 to 5 ads or even 10 ads. You know, this one's pretty flexible. And the way that this one behaves is it would predictably spend on like 3 ads, or like 1 to 3 ads would get all the spend. The other 7 wouldn't really get spent. So it was a good way to like throw a bunch of creatives in there and find some winners. It was very aggressively skewing the spend towards only a few ads. So obviously that has its pros and cons, right? Most of your ads aren't going to get spent. So that's a con. But the pro was a lot of times it would find that winner. So you know, I won't go too much into it, but only because they're taking this away. But you know, shout out to the Advantage Shopping campaigns. They worked like a charm. I hope that they bring them back. If not, oh well. You know, we can use the first 3 setups. So that's enough about that. All right, the last thing that I want to cover in this video is going to be bad setups. Setups that don't really make a lot of sense, okay? So the first one that I want to cover is when you do an ABO, an ad set budget optimization campaign, but you set tiny little budgets, okay? I've seen this so many times where, let's say for example, this was an ABO, right? We have 4 ad sets. Let's imagine that our average cost per purchase was 50, for example, okay? Well, what I've seen agencies do and you know, advertisers do is that they will do like a $5 a day budget on each one of these and then expect good results when their average cost per purchase is 50, right? If your average cost per purchase is 50 and you set a $5 a day budget, it's going to take 10 days to get a sale. And then once you get that sale, you're going to have to wait another 10 days to get a sale. So it makes 0 sense to do it like that. For various reasons, right? So number one, you're going to have a hard time getting sales if you set it up this way and you go 10 days without a sale, without a purchase conversion event or a lead conversion event. Meta's algorithm is going to get lost. It's not going to optimize well. So that's the first reason. Second reason is if you get it to work, right? You have this tiny little budget. Like, what are you going to do with that? Like, you're going to scale from $5 to $10 to $20 to $100. Like, it's going to take a really long time to scale that. So you're kind of screwed like scaling wise. Now, if you try to graduate it to a new campaign at $100, for example, you start at $5, there's no guarantee that it works. It's going to work at $100 if it worked at $5. Completely different ball game. So you're not really testing like at scale. That's why I always recommend to set appropriate budgets from the very beginning, right? Set budgets that make sense. Set budgets that are within your comfort zone, you're willing to spend it, right? But budgets that you're willing to let run for at least like 2, 3, 4, 5 days without panicking and closing. And if it works, then great. You have a campaign that's profitable at $100 a day or $500 a day, whatever your comfort zone is, right? So it's a lot easier to scale from 500 to 1,000 than it is from 5 to 100, right? So big difference there. I would avoid trying to be cheap and like save money by setting these tiny little budgets. You're going to end up spending more in the long run. So just set appropriate budgets and you're going to have much better results. All right, the next setup that I see all the time that drives me crazy, I think it's a really bad strategy. I don't think it's a really bad strategy. I've actually seen it. I've had a lot of people come to me doing consulting calls and joining my groups because they followed this strategy on YouTube or, you know, a bunch of gurus like this this lazy setup. So we're here to debunk why this is a bad idea. So that would be the single CBO campaign. Okay, so the premise of this setup is you do a single CBO testing campaign. You basically treat it like an ABO. You keep adding new ad sets inside, and then you expect it to have good results. And their premise is if the new thing that you introduce gets spend, that means it's better than whatever's in there, and it's going to I guess that's your proving ground. If it gets spend, it does well, right? But that violates this setup, right? Imagine, right? You have this one CBO campaign, you have various ad sets inside. Every time you add something new in there, you violate the golden rule of touching something when it's working. So imagine it's working, you add a new ad set and you completely throw off the balance of the CBO because the ad sets actually impact one another. Well, that's a huge issue. You're literally risking your whole campaign every time you do that, right? Also, every time you add a new ad set into a CBO, you have to account for the fact that now you're dividing your campaign budget by one more ad set. That would lower the amount that the other ad sets are getting per day because now you have your other one that's taking some spend. And that could push you to a point where each ad set is not getting enough spend to get the conversions it needs to optimize. So that's another reason why this one single CBO campaign setup for testing doesn't make sense. Yet another reason why this is a bad idea is when you introduce new ad sets or new ads into something that's working, you're introducing it into something that's already optimized in a certain way. So it already has conversion data. Meta's algorithm tends to favor things that it knows can get conversions, right? Instead of kind of risking spending towards something new. So a lot of the times the things don't get spent. Not always, but a lot of times. So you may end up just not being able to spend on new creatives that you spent money on. And that's a big issue because you may end up paying a lot of money to UGC creators, editors, designers, and all that stuff, thinking that you have bad creatives when in reality they just didn't get spent because your campaign setup was flawed. Keep that in mind. We already talked about if it doesn't get spent, that does not mean it's bad. It just means that Meta thought the other things were potentially better. So, introduce new tests into a new campaign or an ABO in a new ad set, right? The last reason why I don't like this setup is because you don't have that much optionality, right? If you have this one CBO, all the ad sets impact each other, what are you gonna do if something goes bad, right? You just have one campaign, for example. All you can really do is lower the budget, right? You can lower the budget, you can maybe turn off some ad sets that are underperforming. In reality, you don't have that many options, right? When you have the other three setups that I talked about, the single ad set CBO, multi-ad set CBOs, different campaigns, or a ABO campaign, right? Boom, 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 many ad sets. Well, you have options. It's like you have a diversified portfolio that you can decide to turn things off if things go bad. If you vary up your strategies, you do some broad, you do some interest, you do some lookalikes, not all of the campaigns are going to be affected in the same way when things go bad. So you have options to turn things off. But if you do this setup, and this is like your core setup, you just have one campaign, it's all going to get affected pretty much together. It's one campaign, right? They're probably doing broad because that's what the gurus tell you to do. So you need to understand that you don't have that many options. And I think a consolidated structure makes sense at smaller spends, but at bigger spends, it makes no sense. I rather have a diversified portfolio of campaigns and ad sets that I can pick and choose what I turn off, starting from the worst to the best, versus just being locked into one campaign that is consolidated, it's easy. Guys, nothing in life is easy, okay? Don't let people fool you. There's no setting this up and forgetting it. You have to pay attention to what's going on. I recommend that you think deeper about what's actually going on, how the algorithm works, and don't follow just a random blueprint or magic formula that somebody says works across all accounts. It doesn't exist. Okay, I'm just keeping it real with you guys. All right, last big mistake that I see, and that's graduating things, right? So when you graduate something, you should be graduating it into either an ABO with ad sets that don't impact one another or completely new CBO campaigns, right? You don't want to introduce new ad sets into an active CBO. You don't want to add ads into active campaigns. Again, because it breaks that rule of potentially breaking something that was working. So it's really important that you understand that because I see so many people just graduating things into campaigns that are already working and then they ruin the campaign. That's not ideal, right? Also, I see people turning off the things inside of their testing campaigns, right? They say, oh, this works in my testing campaign. I'm going to graduate it to my scaling campaign, and then they turn off the thing that was profitable, and then they go and they launch it in the scaling campaign, and it doesn't work. Now they've completely screwed themselves, right? So moral of the story, don't ever turn anything off that is profitable, guys. Set appropriate budgets so that you don't have to graduate something from a $5 a day budget to a $100 a day budget. Just start at $100. Makes way more sense. You're going to get to your destination, or you're going to meet your goals a lot faster if you do that. So to summarize all of this, I've worked on countless ad accounts at this point, definitely in the hundreds. There's no one best way, right? Each one has pros and cons, and now you understand the pros and cons of each one and how they work and how they behave. So now it's your job to take this information and test out various strategies. Follow the best practices, and I think you're gonna have a much better time testing in meta ads. Now, I also have a Reddit post where I explain all this in writing. So if this video is too much, you can have that guide there with you whenever you're testing things, and I think it will serve you very well. So hope this was helpful. Thank you. All right, you guys, that's it for today's video. I know that was a lot of information. I hope you found it really valuable. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you could give this video a thumbs up and share it with somebody that would benefit from it. If you want to dive deeper into these strategies or just get extra guidance, I highly recommend that you join my Meta Ads Mastery School community. This is a community where we're discussing this type of stuff every week, twice a week, live, and I'm available to you to answer any of your meta ads questions. If that's something that interests you, I highly recommend that you check it out. There's absolutely no risk to join. I have a 1-year guarantee, guys, and that is the strongest guarantee that I've been able to find on school. And that's because I truly believe in what I'm teaching and the service that I provide. So I hope to see you on the inside. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.